morning, grasshoppers. We're waiting for our stream to refresh. I do have to do the hydrate for Pegasus. I haven't entirely given up on that. Let's put it over here so I'll remember to do that. Setting up a Capablanca study stream. My favorite subject with Capablanca, of course, is endgames. And in the famous game Capablanca Corso, I guess I'll leave the opening book up for now. Basically because Capablanca was not always on the cutting edge of theory, but he definitely had a good feel. Hen Chess, good morning. Back to the daily grind indeed. Thank you for being here. Starting off with Capablanca Corso from one of my favorite books, Capablanca's Best Chess Endgames. Oops. I'm going to get this into place because I'm going to use it again later when we have more viewers. Grandmaster Ron Henley in the house. Now, interestingly enough, because of the reputation of games like this one, many people preface the move f5 with e6. Perfectly acceptable and reasonable. Yeah, absolutely. Capablanca, and I was telling someone earlier, they asked how you develop instinctive play, and you can't go over enough grandmaster games, world champions games in order to develop a feel for how a game is supposed to unfold, how a game is truly supposed to be played, and where the pieces are really heading or belong. You can actually see the positions. The more you study Capablanca, the more you study those players who had a true mastery and logic behind the flow of the moves. Conceptual thinking, yeah. So for the most part, in this particular position, today we know the best move is, the most flexible and best move is easily like g3. But the Dutch is perhaps not necessarily at its best after c4, so that's why people play e6 instead of playing f5 immediately. The classical Dutch has a little bit more of a hitch though. Capablanca, of course, goes balls to the wall with e4, and he's of course very young at this point. Of course, I just failed to do my Capablanca research real quick. I'm trying to recall. I know Frank Marshall was born, I think, in 1889. Now, of course, while we know Capablanca was born in 1888, so that's not so hard. Not so hard to recall. Oh, I'm take it back. Frank Marshall was born in 1877. Capablanca was born in 1888. They were actually very good friends in the early days of New York chess. Capablanca made it to his first international chess tournament in San Sebastian, much thanks to Frank Marshall getting him in. That's also a Dutch, yes. I think that, I'm not sure if that's the one where he sacks 2 pawns in the rook ending and sneaks his king around to g6. So for the most part, this pawn sacrifice is a very good example of the spirit of Capablanca's youth. And of course, natural moves like e6 would lead to debacles, as in the casual game Torre versus Lasker. Is it Torre versus Lasker? Let's just see how much of that I can remember. And castles, bishop d3, b6, queen e2. Oh, it wasn't queen e2, it was knight e5. Knight e5, bishop, queen h5, queen e7. And then something strange happens here. Does black just ignore him with knight c6? No, that doesn't make sense. Oh, I take it back. It's white's turn to move here. I was looking over here at the mistake. Yeah, queen takes e7, and then we just have to make sure that we Lasker versus Torre. No, this is Lasker versus. I've drawn a blank completely. I'm all confused, but I'm fairly sure that it's Lasker Torre. Edward or Emmanuel. Oh man, I'm drawing a blank. But that is one of my favorite games for active piece play because it's such a natural game. That is one of those immortal games that should be on Chessable. And in this particular game, Corzo plays c6. With the obvious attempt to protect his pawn. So therefore, if we're gonna act really quickly to retain our central, or at least our material balance. Queen e7 check, not always thought to be such a good move, but Capablanca was never one to be adverse to queen exchanges. All of these moves are fairly natural. Black does have the advantage of the two bishops, which is quite reasonable, given that he's lost a half a tempo on the pawn move f6, which is not really useful. Is Black going to give back the bishop pair right away, creating a bishop in opposite color situation? No. He's actually going to try to cripple White's pawns in this particular fashion. And now, while Corzo's given up the advantage of the two bishops, he has attempted to achieve a superior pawn structure. Oh, Lasker Thomas. Thank you. I don't know why I kept saying Torre. I knew that it was Lasker Thomas. That's right. I'm going to put that one in here. And it was London. Uh, 1920. I'm going to take a stab at 1920. Yeah, I had the T. No, I was stuck with Adam's Torre for whatever reason. All I could think of was Adam's Torre, which is in the same. I think Adam's Torre took place in 1925. This game took place in 1925, I think. I think that the other game took place in 1920, 5 years before Torre won. I'll come back and fix it later. Yeah, that was a classic. It truly was. What we have no opening database to speak of here, as we're now firmly entrenched in trying to wrestle a modicum of endgame understanding from Capablanca here for the most part. Now, we do have 3 pawns to 3 pawns on one side of the board, but white's pawns are crippled. And we have 4 pawns to 4 pawns on the other side of the board, but white retains an extra tempo with the idea of playing either c3 or c4, depending on how he wants to play it. In any event, after rook e1, rook on a8 to e8, king f1, you can see what Capablanca is up to, as he's taking it straight into a bishop versus knight endgame. So in a bishop versus knight endgame, with pawns on both sides of the board, bishop has a micro advantage. But what does that really mean? And then he lures his opponent into trying to outpost his knight. Let's just take a moment to consider what was going to happen on knight takes g3. The immediate fork, of course, would occur with king to f4, and white's king position would be improved. And after king, let's see, knight f1, king takes f5, knight to e3 check. So after king f4, knight f1, white would preface it with bishop e3. Let's see that on the board. Basically, knight f1 preparing to indirectly defending the pawn on f5 with the attack on that one. But first we're going to dominate in this respect, and then we'll capture. Zwischenzug. So therefore, white is already displaying much better positional prowess in this endgame than his opponent Corzo. And Capablanca keeps Corzo from outposting a knight or even threatening any form of tactics on these squares. King f7, king f4, king f6. And while this position may appear drawish, Capablanca, not unlike the modern day Carlsen, had the ability to squeeze blood out of a stone in these positions. I don't even want to look at it with the engine, honestly. But white's next move is fairly logical and fairly straightforward, because we don't want our king to be shoved back. Now black has to be very mindful of how he advances his kingside pawn. If he plays the immediate h6, white might be able to lock down on all of those pawns in the g6 square. So Corzo prefaces the expansion of the pawns on the king side with g6, which is a common theme in many, many structures. But Capablanca gets to beat him to it. We're already eliminating our double pawn weakness, and in this particular position, is he really allowing him in on the other side of the board? What would Capablanca do? WWCD. Well, Capablanca comes up with a really, really cool concept in this particular position. I'm not entirely sure it's warranted, though. Oh, I take it back. I apologize. This is not the exact position. I was wondering what was wrong with this picture. The longer I looked at it, g4, h6, g5, h takes g5. Don't tell me this is fiction as well. King e7, now g4. F takes g4 and white to move. Believe it or not, there are 3 moves in this position, all worth considering. Capablanca of course, plays the most active one. as we pause for just a moment, as I would expect anyone to pause and consider what's going on in this position. Of course, we have the two logical moves. King takes g4, bishop takes g4. But Capablanca finds a third and perhaps more exacting move in the form of bishop d3, which is really profound to my mind. It really is. Because the idea of allowing the opponent to play knight f5, outposting his knight, we cannot take because we'll be outside the square of the pawn on g4. It'll just press through. So on knight f5, bishop takes f5, g takes f5 would be strategically winning for black. We would be dead lost. So therefore, after the move knight f5, only now do we insert this position, so king takes g4, as black doesn't have any way of protecting the knight. After all, the king and pawn ending after bishop takes, this king is zugged, and soon he'll be run out of tempo, and we'll be capturing this pawn out of tempi, I should say. He'll run out of tempi, and needless to say, let's just say, what does he say in the book about this? 1 second. We also may or may not be able to win once our queenside pawns are secure with the decoy of the pawn king takes f5 as well. Pawn push, king g7 takes, and we still have more tempi in order to outflank our opponent if needed. If needed. No guarantees there, though. That requires exact calculation. In any event, that is not what happened. Or is it? No. Instead, black had to give up the outside passed pawn. Now we truly do have pawns on both sides of the board versus black's king and knight having pawns only on the queen side. And black gets his candidate passed pawn moving. One of Capablanca's concepts was the candidate passed pawn. The pawn that has no opposite on a file will be the one that will be assisted through with the help of the others to the flank. Candidate passed pawns are always really, really important. I also want to mention that in answer to an earlier viewer's question about how to develop instincts in chess, you have to play over a lot of master games interactively. You can't just sit back and just expect to absorb it completely. Yes, that will happen, but it also helps if you have an interactive method of moving the pieces alongside it. Take, for example, Hen Chess's, I'm going to throw that one in there, Grandmaster Ron Henley's video series, let's just say Karpov on Capablanca, or Karpov on Flip Fisher, the 3-volume set that's on sale right now, I think on iChess.net. What I would do, Ron, when I was watching videos, whether it was by you or anyone else, when you had a Lev Albert, I think, on the Benko Gambit, I'm not entirely sure if that was a video that you did. I can't recall, but basically what I would do is I would play through the games using my touchscreen and ChessBase. And I would basically be moving the pieces along with the video. And I would actually have to pause every now and then the video to soak in what was going on in the position. I didn't necessarily like just watching the video without interactively. And I would do this with Daniel King's videos, with Agadmator videos on occasion. But when he spurs into a line of analysis, I don't always try to play through every line of analysis or Karpov's analysis. There was a great game between Karpov and Yusupov in a Queen's Gambit that was absolutely brilliant. I think it was in a Tartic Hour in one of your videos, Ron, I believe. I think I'm attributing a lot of these to yours. I've watched a lot of your videos over the years. Good stuff. Good stuff. In any event, So in this particular position, the candidate passed pawn, being the d pawn, is prime. Black does have to get his pawns moving. And we have to decide how we're going to get our stuff moving. And how we're going to barnacle against this passed pawn being pushed. First, we have to put the knight in a very passive position. And once the knight is in a very passive position, such as e8, I mean, we could try to dominate the knight with bishop to g4 so that we can move our king forward, or we can play bishop d7, or we can gain time on the pawn. Capablanca chooses to gain time on the pawn and push. Again, candidate passed pawn, and now white starts to lock down on all counterplay. King to g8, a4. Notice how we're fixing the pawns on the queen side. Yes, Jeff, this is Capablanca Corso, actually. One of the greatest bishop versus knight endgames one could ask for. Although it was pretty effortless on Capablanca's part. Masters really do make the game look easy. Given that white is winning, we know which side was which. There's a great Chess Stars series on Capablanca, which I would love to do one of these days, if I ever had it. This series of books, it's a 2-volume set that I think is done by Kaufman. And almost all the games are analyzed. If I were to do a 24-hour study stream on the World Champions, this would be the shot, honestly. I would do the Chess Stars series, cover to cover, and see how much of it I could do in 24 hours. How many World Champions do we have? 16. Could I do 16 24-hour streams in 1 year? I don't know about that. It'd be much easier to do 32 12-hour streams than 16 24-hour streams. I think for every World Champion's birthday, we could probably do a 12-hour stream of instruction. That's what I have to do. I have to plan ahead. We have one coming up, I believe. I'm trying to remember who's coming up in January. Let me check my calendar for a moment. While I take a break from the instruction, you can always check our tournaments page. World Champion Boris Spassky. Yes. World Champion Boris Spassky. If I were to use a book for a 12-hour stream on Boris Spassky, I would use 300 wins. So Boris Spassky is January 30th, I believe. Let's just go down here. Arthur Yusupov is February 13th. And Boris Spassky is January 30th. Got to plan on that one well in advance. Maybe I should start advertising. WC number 10. Get a cast of several really strong players to collaborate on that stream in periods so that we can just tag off to a certain extent. And Qiu Zhao, AK and Nemsko, is in 2 days on the rather infamous January 6th. Let's get back to our study. So A4 fixes or attempts to fix the pawns. There's just no way for black to create counterplay. You can see how the knight is somewhat cut off in this particular position. This is domination. I should find out a little bit more about the composers like Kasparian, so that when he has a birthday, we can actually do some of his studies. So after the move, oh no, January 30th, that's tragic. There is a scholastic tournament being held, Scholastic National Tournament being held by the Charlotte Chess Center on the 29th and 30th. Ye gads, how am I going to coordinate all of this? Not good. In any event, in order to step the king forward to h7, Capablanca restricts the knight from h5. And I'm not entirely sure why black gives up on this idea. Possibly because if king to g8, then bishop to e2. No? King to g8, bishop d7. We have to consider all the possibilities here. This book that I'm using does not delve so deeply into this particular part of the endgame. Yeah, right? But it's quite interesting that Corzo makes every effort to try to prevent king h7 while not paying attention to the fact that king h7 can be played anyway. The simple fact is that if knight f6 check, king h8, we're planning on pushing our pawn through in a hurry, with or without this knight being taken. So it's quite awkward. So he returns to the scene of the blockade. Capablanca again repeats the position. This was one of Capablanca's techniques, by the way. Capablanca had a technique of repeating the position in order to lull the opponent a little bit. He believed in lulling the opponent. Do not hurry was a key component. Now bishop to c4. And we're going to reroute. If king g7, bishop b5, knight to d6, bishop d3. That is dominating the knight on d6, by the way, bishop on d3. Knight e8, king f5, and white has gained a tempi toward migrating his king to the queen side, while the bishop on d3 supports the g6 pawn. So black instead tries to blockade the advance of the king with king to e7. Just a very natural Now, once again, the great benefit of having a bishop over a knight is the bishop's ability to gain and lose time while controlling the same squares. The bishop and the knight unfortunately must change color squares every time it moves, so it can ever actually only control, let's just say, the dark squares every other move. While the bishop can hold a square from a great distance and mark time, that is, move back and forth, while the opponent must make a move. So, here we go. We're going to start with bishop to e2, knight to g7, king to d5. We get to see the power of the outside pass pawn. And what might black's defensive idea be? Well, he's going to try to shut in the white king on a7. That is his last ditch plan. Why is he playing on? Well, he does have a plan. And here's his plan. However, a pawn breakthrough is imminent. Tempo. And personally, I would be very much inclined to just continue the tempo gain in this manner, but we're going to go to this square and we're going to limit the movements of the knight from the other side. And now that black's knight can no longer come to the other side of the board to assist, white gets to prepare the breakthrough with the pawns. First we attack the pawn on c5 so that we might undermine it with the move a4. I'm sorry, a4, a5. And when the knight does move, that is indeed our plan. One might wonder about this, but we still have a6. And we no longer have time for b5 to keep the king shut out because of g7. And there's literally nothing going on here for the most part. There's no way to stop g7 from happening. And that is the end of the road for the most part. Now this was the 9th match game between Capablanca and Corzo. In the 11th match game, Capablanca again has white. And in this particular manner, for example, Capablanca continues with d4. So imagine he was born in 1888. He's 12 years old, about to become 13 in November of this year, right? So 1900, yeah, he's 12 years old playing this match with Corzo. This time the opponent doesn't question Capablanca's ability to assert himself in the center after that move, f5 and the Staunton Gambit with e4. Another move, of course, which I'll borrow from Petrosian, is that after e6, I'm really torn here, but Petrosian would play. Oh, I'm positive that he studied and seen Morphy's games. I know he says that he only had a book on rook and pawn endgames that he was studying, but I believe that he was honestly studying all the good games of the players of the time. It's just like baseball. If you're a baseball fan, you know all the generic statistics for your favorite players, perhaps your favorite team, and beyond. And if you're a chess player, then you should know, really know, the games of one world champion. And that game and that particular player you will associate with most closely. So for example, now Petrosian would often say, if your opponent wishes to play the Dutch, let him. So I don't know that that means, in this particular position, that white should play c4, right? What are the statistics on this? I love playing against the French, a little bit more so than I like playing against the Dutch. So therefore e4 is a very big part of my repertoire. I really do love playing against the French. On the other hand, after d4, d5, Capablanca invariably, as he did in his match with Lasker to become world champion, Capablanca plays knight f3 following d4, d5 much of the time. If you're in our Discord channel, you will be able to find all of that under the World Champion Studies. We did the complete Lasker Capablanca match was a very short match. I think it was only about 14 games. But it was relatively one-sided. First person to win 6 games. A la Fischer requirement style. Now, Black answers with a close cousin to the Austrian attack. I think this is the Austrian attack, honestly. I'm not entirely sure why it's called the Kraus variation. But maybe Kraus was from Austria. Capablanca always proceeds very cautiously in the opening, regardless. And here he's playing the Zukertort Coley variation. Not committing the knight on b1 to d2 just yet. And then there's another school of players who don't commit the knight on b1 to d2. They play bishop to d3. Believe it or not, even if the bishop goes to d3, knight to b4 does not gain any time on the bishop, because it really matters not what Black does here. Let's imagine that for the most part Black plays bishop to d6, a3, knight c6, bishop d3. So once again, after bishop to d3, the only moves that we're missing are bishop d6 and a3, and it's Black's turn to move again. So if we look at this ever so lightly from move number 7, if we just played bishop d6 as Black and White played a3 versus move number 9, all we did was manage to mark time. So the move knight to b4, when the knight's going to be pushed back, doesn't really have all that much independent significance in this particular position. So bishop d3, knight to b4, a3 in advance of it does not make as much sense unless you think there's an independent continuation that you're afraid of. It's not worth it. I especially enjoy this particular setup as White in Blitz, and I probably should return to it if I just want to gain rating points. But Black does want to bring his bishop out to d6. As you can see, it's one of the popular moves over here. However, prefacing it with c takes d4 avoids losing time. It also fixes the pawn from e3 and tries to make the bishop on b2 a very tall pawn. And now Black, of course, goes on the offensive. Bishop d3 is advertised. Black castles, playing very mechanically according to Chernev. He misses his opportunity to play bishop e7 and possibly bishop to a3, getting rid of White's bishop. But the other thing in this position that I have to mention is that I prefer moves like queen to c7 when a knight can't go to b5. And of course also perhaps moves like b6 with bishop to b7 ideas, rather than committing the king so early. Because with this attack on the king side, by the way, all you really have to do against Coley, Stonewall, and Coley Zukertort setups is just to be one move away from castling rather than committing to castling. Because when you commit to castling, then the attack may commence. Up until that moment, you really don't need to worry about anything on your king. So therefore, after Black castles, White is free to castle, and then knight h5 attempts to take advantage of the weak, dark squares, which Capablanca immediately restricts. Very logical move. Black, of course, is on the offensive. He is down in this match at this point, so he has to do something. And now, we're not just putting a knight on a terrific outpost square, we're also tagging the knight on h5. So the knight returns to f6, f4. Don't worry, we will have a lot more quizzing in this. I'm not sure I can understand this one except for the fact that he doesn't want the other knight coming in very quickly to support it. Now life gets very awkward for Black, but Black is still planning on playing knight f6, knight f7, and g5 with a pawn offensive against the White king, using his 3 pawns to White's only 2 minority. is 3-pawn majority. So queen to e2, queen to b6. This is a direct threat on the e5 pawn. There are two reasons the d pawn doesn't take. I'm going to go back to this for a moment. There are two reasons the d pawn doesn't take. One, we're not in a position to take advantage of the d4 square with our pieces just yet. Plus, by opening up this line on the board, he's actually created an outpost square for some of his pieces. And this bishop is actually quite dead. It needs to reroute itself and come to this side of the board, or whether we go to that side of the board. So taking with the f-pawn increases the likelihood that we're going to have an opportunity to use the f4 square to be able to bolster on g4. That's one of the reasons why black goes for this one as well. And in this particular position, it also decreases the amount of counterplay with queen to b6. I should probably mention that too, as we're about to see that. Queen to b6 would not be checked. I mean, there are going to be moments when we're going to take in both ways, but chances are I would probably be taking with the d pawn when the f5 pawn is not in that place. That way we can push f5 from f4. But if we have a structure with this one, like e6, d5, and f5, I want to be able to capture toward the center, giving us a space advantage and a locked center, and at the same time be able to use these squares and these open lines. So knight f3, after all, that pawn was being attacked twice. It was only defended once because of the pin. Any other move could have been very embarrassing. For example, rook on a to e1, black just gets to capture, and there's no way to recapture. So therefore, knight f3 does support the pawn. Black continues his development as part of an overall strategy. a3, I think we're finally concerned about losing this bishop because we're not able to recapture with the queen. It could get just very awkward. King h8, h3, knight h6, queen f2. Again, now we've freed up this knight to be able to move, so there's less pressure on the e5 pawn with the help of that pin. And black moves on toward his merry way. King to g2, g5, as advertised. Strange as it may seem, black's king is less safe than white's king. The main idea here, and if anybody remembers this game, this is quite the game because it involves a queen sacrifice on Capablanca's part in order to open up the long diagonal. Does not necessarily mean that he's going to win the game because of the queen sacrifice, but he is going to obtain a better endgame. Which is, of course, relatively key. So g5, ha. Capablanca, of course, hits him immediately right back with g4. Black tries to bolster his pawn duo on g5 and f5. Black cannot afford to allow his pawns to be ripped up and broken down with a pawn break at his base of the chain, so he chooses to try to hold his portion in the center. Queen e3, rook g8, rook on a to e1. Once again, it's my favorite expression. Rooks, everyone, rooks. The stronger player often gets the rooks to the right squares faster and better than the opponent. I say often because it doesn't happen absolutely every single time. Sometimes anyone can be on the ball. So the f4 square is beckoning. We also have to be very leery of playing knight takes g5 because of knight h4 check and the discovery on said knight. G takes f5. Knight. Oh, not knight h4. I actually remember thinking about this when I was younger, but instead, knight f4. King h2. He does grab the bishop pair. And here we are. We're off to the races. Capablanca actually sets up a little bit of a trap, inviting his opponent to skewer his queen and his rook. He really does set a trap. Based on this particular instance, I'm very curious as to what many people might estimate Corso's rating to be. Now, on the other hand, everything is in the works. Let's just make sure I don't make a mistake on this notation. Close the opening book. It's distracting me by flickering back and forth. But basically, we should pause somewhere around here. On the other hand, e6 is met by bishop to b5, and this is exactly the position that everyone should have already seen. I am curious as to run an engine on this one now. Not in this position, but later when black chooses to give the queen back as a defensive necessity. I'll refund Pegasus's hydrate since he doesn't seem to be here. I mean, this move is pretty obvious. I believe Rogue Girl is still a bot. No worries. No worries, Ron. We might have a new crowd here. Just in case they weren't aware that Grandmaster Ron Henley is in the relative building and taking a hiatus from streaming. I actually played a game on ICC last night on my stream by accident. I forget how I brought up the ICC. I think I was trying to fix my board and pieces because I was comparing my board and pieces to what I enjoyed on ICC versus this, that, and the other thing. You get it, right? Cool. E5 check. And it's almost devastating. But like I said, these games are not always won. Capablanca's games are not always won by dramatic tactics or checkmating finishes. They're usually won by achieving a better endgame thanks to certain small incremental combinations, which are relatively key. Now he has to prevent knight takes g5. And we'll pause for a moment for some candidates for white. I'm using my blue hourglass at the moment. Our blue hourglass. I should take that line off there so it doesn't distract anyone. Well, the next move is relatively obvious. If we're going to put more pressure on the knight, F rook hanging, it is a little bit of a trick here if we try to play for any form of attack on this file. But no, white does centralize his knight, planning on playing either knight to e6 or knight takes f5, putting more pressure on the rook. And this will be an overwhelming material advantage, so black actually returns the queen in this particular position to have two pieces for a rook and to be able to take care of the situation on f7. But going back, is that black's best move? Yes. Black did not have much of a choice. There are several problems in this position with queen takes d5, basically rook to e8, check king h7, and we promote. That's the end of the story. So therefore, giving back the exchange is key. Rook takes f1, rook takes f7. The endgame has not yet quite completely begun because now we have a choice of several moves as well again. We could begin by pushing our pawn. We could take advantage of the discovered attack in several different ways. And of course we can play Capablanca's move. Which is, of course, the most straightforward move. And this one, I actually learned a lot about promoting pawns in this one. This one I remember distinctly learning a lot about promoting pawns. In fact, I think everything about Capablanca's games lends itself to you playing a better endgame regardless of how much of Dvoretsky's endgame manual you know. Because you will be a master strength player just playing over the endgames of the masters. So rook takes f5, rook takes f5, knight takes check, and we have to guard, or at least he thinks he has to guard. And now, moment of truth. Candidates for white. Grandmaster Ron Henley in the house. Ron, of course, knows the move, but this is a little bit of a Pink Floyd strategy. I'll explain the Pink Floyd strategy later. Be careful of bishop to g7 because king to g6 is a fork. We'll actually lose material after bishop g7. I cannot wait to start playing over the board chess. My rating, Ron, is so low. Absolutely ridiculously so low. If there were any money in chess, I could offer like 10 to 20% to coaches on top of a discounted, more routine structural lesson format from prize money if there were actually money in chess, but there's not. So h4 doesn't quite work, but I would say that this one all boils down to my favorite, and I haven't set up the alias yet, so both of these commands should work. Piece and pieces should both lead to the same command, but it's piece coordination that is the hallmark of a master's play. And in this particular position, our time is up, so we're actually going to build the wall, as I referred to Pink Floyd there. The king is now completely out of the game, whereas white's king can now enter, the pawn can now be pushed forward, we can guard everything, and there's literally nothing black can do about it. He has to feverishly try to work against this. Yeah, if the knight is attacked, we're just going to guard, and if the pawn is attacked, we're just going to guard it. And there's nothing that black can do about it. He's completely helpless. This is a perfect example of piece coordination with knight e7. Hold on here. Rook f8 makes a meager attempt at counterplay. Do not fall for losing a piece to rook f2 check. I don't know that it matters that king g3 gives up a tempo to a pawn push with check, but he also doesn't want the rook coming in and getting behind the passed pawn either. So king to g2, h5, d6, g4, hg, hg, and now bishop to e5. As advertised, there's going to be a very, very distinct option for white to promote this pawn with the help of bishop c7, or my other favorite move in this position, which is in my personal book, by the way, on pawn promotion, which is the very simple bishop f6 move in order to escort the pawn through. May even come from this book. So king h5, h6, d7. Now it looks like he's actually given up the pawn, but because of the position on the position of the king on h6, we have knight to g8 check, and of course if the king moves, let's just assume like the king can't go anywhere, we can simply guard this and then go right after the rook. And the endgame is lost. The endgame is lost simply because black is not threatening to take the knight in any way, shape, or form. We have all the tempi in the world with our king, and the king can't move out. And with an extra knight, we're winning this endgame anyway. So after knight to g8 check, Corzo decides to take the knight, and of course the very simple follow-up is bishop f6, which we were talking about before. Oh, I take it back. Capablanca actually played bishop to c7. I prefer bishop to f6, mainly because if the bishop gets attacked by the king, we're just promoting. King to g6, d8 equals queen. Oh, can I not tap and tap? Let's see if we can fix that in my game preferences. Tap and tap are always drag. I know. Game behavior. Promote to queen. How do you move pieces? Either. I'm not a big fan of tapping. Unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of tapping because you could accidentally tap on a piece and then tap on a destination square, then you're in trouble. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you learn endgames first because you have to master the movements of the pieces. So if you really want to learn how to move the pieces or how to play chess, it is key that you do a certain number of mate and wands, a certain number of pawn promotions. You learn how the pieces work well together in small incremental groups. It's like if you wanted to give a class project, let's say you're in school for a hypothetical, right? Like who in our stream would be actually in school right now as opposed to being on a holiday break? But you have a class of, let's say, I'm just going to pick 16 people. You can give out a project where they all have to work together to all 16 people, I know, I'm joking a little bit there, Rotten Lemons. I have school tomorrow too. Unfortunately, I teach online. I'm remote until Thursday. Um, yeah, I knew you were in school. I've missed you dearly, sir, for a long time because you were concentrating on your schoolwork. You sort of ducked away. But it's good stuff. A, if you give a project to 16 people to coordinate, I appreciate that. If you give a project to 16 people to coordinate, wow, I'm looking very, very white. It's because of the sun coming through the window. You gats. There's hardly anything I can do about that sun. I might actually have to buy some drapes. The morning stream is a very white stream. Alexa, turn off desk. That didn't help. There are lights on the desk, but it's really the sun. So if I cover it up, the white balancing is off. I'm not all that worried though, because it's not about me. Well, for instruction, I would hope so. Is this the one that I'm actually thinking about for the most part? I'm wondering if this is the end game. That I think that there is a trick regarding a king stalemate over here, where the white's king will later have to step to c5 rather than c6 because of a pawn push, and bishop takes would actually enable stalemate. Keep that prediction in mind for later. As I've seen this game before, this is the game that I'm thinking of, where the king comes over here to try to invade. This king goes over here, and this king must go to c5 rather than c6, because should this king be on c6, black pushes his pawn, the bishop takes, and it's stalemate because the king on c6 versus the bishop keeps him locked in with a black pawn on a6. A little bit of plot bridging toward the end there, because I can actually see that happening in this particular game. Literally, when I see this position, that's exactly the position that I go to. Now, in a 3-hour stream, I'm hoping to do more than just 5 or 6 games, but we'll see what happens. So, on move number 45 for black, he does try to ruin white's day. King f2. Did Capablanca miss a quicker win by playing king to g3, king f5, and b4, fixing the pawn? Possibly. But Capablanca saw one line of play leading to a win, and that was enough. That's actually, unfortunately, a terrible habit of mine. Seeing one line of play leading to a win, and that was good enough. This is one of the reasons why Alekhine took advantage of Capablanca. No, I disagree. There are a few grandmasters, there are a few world champions that are noted for their endgame ability. I think, personally, the player that I would put ahead of Capablanca for his endgame ability was Smyslov. Smyslov was more of a purist through and through. He was a very, very good player. Very, very good player. Karpov was also like a combination of Smyslov and Capablanca. Oeva was quite a bit of a technician. He was also extremely good, but I don't think any of the world champions should ever be discounted for being or try to be pigeonholed for being in a particular camp. Whether they're endgame players or middle game players or opening players, they're all universal players to a great extent. So king f5, king e3, king e5, king d3, king d5, king c3, and g3. Bishop h4, g2, bishop f2. Clearly the bishop has to blockade the pawn. Black plays a5, and white plays b4, which is extremely important. Now black comes up with a really cool concept to show that he is no slouch. Black plays king to e4. And the real key moment of understanding here, I'll give everyone a chance to try to figure out what's going on about piece coordination and candidates for white in this position, for example. It's a very difficult position, honestly. And I would say it's a very difficult position, honestly, because you should not take the pawn on a5. If you take the pawn on a5, you will have no way of winning the game. You will have two rook pawns and no way to control the queening square because you have an opposite colored bishop. Oh, I do have all my colors back. Yep, blockading the pawn is probably best. A nice tempo move. Honestly, I didn't look. I did not look. I just assumed that after king e4, oh, I see what he does. He goes after the pawn in a way that does not disturb it. And then he grabs the opposition. King to c6, bishop g1. King to d5, bishop to h2. King to d4, a4. Black is, of course, trying to set up a tactical concept on his own. Now, of course, the actual move order I am altering here ever so slightly. Candidate moves for white. There are, of course, three moves that white can play, depending on how you want to go about it. There are four possible moves that look like they might make progress. And I already told you about this one, right? Do you remember the reference to this one? King c7, g1 equals queen, draw. King c6, g1 equals queen, draw. But Capablanca finds, of course, c5. Now I usually give that possibility. The actual move order in this particular game was king to d5, king to a6. And I try to not let students have this automatic. I like to actually have them having this possibility or that possibility as well as the c5 possibility by putting it on d6. When I show this game in class, I almost always play king to d6 there rather than Capablanca's move. Mainly because after king a6, king to c5 is key. But if you are moving your king in that direction already, notice the pattern of movement. You're headed towards c5. And we should avoid, of course, the possibility of playing king c6 blunder, g1 equals queen, bishop takes, and it's stalemate. Capablanca Marshall. Now, back then, there were not that many tournaments. I should say Marshall Capablanca. So Frank Marshall and Jose Capablanca played a match for the United States Championship in 1909. Yes, this was an official sanctioned match for the U.S. Chess Championship in 1909. And it was held to a great extent for the sole purposes of determining who the strongest player in the United States was. Frank Marshall was already U.S. champion, or at least considered to be U.S. champion regardless of tournament results. And believe it or not, this is played before Capablanca's first ever tournament. I'm going to see if I'm not sure that Capablanca had ever played an actual tournament prior to this 1909 match. You did see that. I take it back. He did play in a round robin tournament for the Cuban Championship in 1901. And that is the match with Corzo was an extension of the Cuban Championship because Corzo won the Cuban Championship. And I should specify which Corzo it is because two Corzos tied for first in the Cuban Championship of 1901. Uh-oh, I might need to return this message here and just see what's going on. But I want to give you a position to think about. Oh, I take it back. The match with Capablanca, the Corzo Capablanca match, took place in November. And I see game number 4 is on November 23rd, 21st. And the first game of the match was on November 17th. So that match took place. Wow, Capablanca lost on his birthday. He lost the first game on the 17th of November. Then on the 19th of November, Capablanca lost the second game of the match. And then he did not win until later. He actually did not lose a game after that, after he lost on his birthday, until the 13th game of the match. This would be a very good match. Basically, because tournaments were so awkward to organize, does anybody know of another reason why this is a match for the Cuban Championship? I believe. But mainly, you'd play a lot of casual games in those days. But why would they have very few tournaments? J. Corzo. Why would they have very few tournaments? Does anybody realize why they would have very few tournaments? And why round robins would be the order of the day? Swiss systems were impossible to run. Nearly impossible to run on scale. No. The tricky part was that chess clocks were so expensive, the fee or the cost to purchase chess clocks for the number of players, right, for that many people is too great. It's much more amenable for the New York Chess Congress of 1857 to have a knockout tournament with staggered days and round times of knockout matches where you just play another player using a clock, because we don't have that many clocks available, and then that tournament's knocked out, so you can actually increase the speed at which the tournament can be played with fewer players because you only have so many clocks. New York 1857 was not played with clocks, though, I have to admit. Games between Louis Paulson and Paul Morphy were 21 hours long. 18 hours long, 28 hours long. Paulson never moved. And there were no chest clocks. Apparently being used. So there's quite abuse of the system by Lewis Paulson. Yep, that is true. So here we are. This is match game number 5. Oops, got the wrong one up there. So there were quite a number of things that happened in this match. I think the 23rd game of the match between Marshall and Capablanca is the other one. Or is it? Let me just take a quick peek ahead because this book is chronological. Yeah, the 23rd game is the one where Capablanca basically uses the terrace defense, pushes through his queenside pawn majority, and wins the game effortlessly. D4, D5, C4. Frank Marshall has more courage than Capablanca in the theory of the openings department. Now E3 is very common. Now Lasker's defense, by the way, was all the rage then. For 31 depth Morphe. Candidates for black here. And of course, one more time, I'm going to mention that if you've not yet followed Hen Chess as our VIP of the day, it's lovely when Ron stops in. Grandmaster Ron Henley, when he returns to streaming, you should definitely be following him. Just to be. A Morphe defense to the Ruy Lopez would be known as A6, even though it was played before Paul Morphe. He had concepts that improved A6, and therefore he revolutionized the idea of playing A6 and then waiting with the B5 move until it was key. Absolutely key to only then play B5. A6 provided the flexibility for black to equalize in many of the positions, which were a little bit stale, like the Berlin defense and other things were under a cloud of passivity. Steinitz defense, Cosio. Only the Schliemann, I think, was probably the most aggressive one. But classical defense of the Ruy Lopez, all of those openings were really, really passive without A6 being thrown in. So candidates for black, no one. Yeah, you could consider this. This is around the time where black might play H6 castles, and it's a little bit too early for B6, and it's also a little bit awkward for black to play knight on B7. Erikito, namaste. How are you, sir? How did the tournament end up this weekend? I think you already told me, but I'm not entirely positive that I was paying attention. Oscar finished in second, I think you said. At least in the Morphe, at least in the one pocket. There was a tournament at Hard Time Billiards. Yeah, you went 2-0 against two strong players. I mentioned my story with, God, I wish I could do something about this lighting. This is probably the worst time to stream. Right? It's probably the worst time to stream because the sun coming in is literally blinding me. Can I get closer? C'est la vie. In any event, not that worried about it. If my horrible memory serves me, that's okay. So we were just talking about it in this particular position, but Lasker's defense, Lasker's concept of defense is to try to simplify the position. Capablanca, by the way, had a very similar concept, and I have to use the opening book to show you. Let's say castles. Knight f3, h6, bishop h4. This is actually Lasker's official defense right here, knight e4. This is the better way to play Lasker's defense. But Lasker's concept is knight e4 to increase the possibility of trades and simplifying in order to equalize his black. But then there was another one, I'm trying to recall if it was... I'm drawing a blank here. Does it happen? Oh, maybe it doesn't happen here. So instead of h6, I'm looking for Capablanca's defense. Capablanca's defense is knight to d5, and also forcing exchanges because the bishop can't go back to f4. What's wrong with knight on b to d7? Let's just take a quick peek about that. The drawback with knight on b to d7 is that the pieces are just a little congested, and this knight is already committed to traveling toward the king side. In general, we might want, let's just take it from a different perspective. Let's just say that we play h6, bishop h4, castles, knight f3, and even in this position you'll see that white is heavily favored with knight on b to d7. But ideally we would like a little bit freer movement and development from our pieces. I don't know that there's anything absolutely wrong with knight on b to d7. It just leads to a little bit less activity for black. So let's just say in this particular position, I'm looking for a move here. How about bishop d3, d takes c4, bishop takes c4, c5, for example. And now our knight can go. a6 should always be in, but our knight has the option to go to c6 and influence the center this way. And the bishop has the option to go to b7 with a gain of time. So not committing that knight, to me, is one of my biases. It may or may not be absolute. I was going to mention it, that it might be one of my biases. So knight e4 is also Lasker's defense. Bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, bishop d3. Knight takes c3, b takes c3, knight on b8, d7, knight f3, castles for black, queen c2. That was also one of the things that I loved about Capablanca's games. You couldn't really question everything that the players were doing, like yesterday or the day before when I'm teaching a student. So here we go. Let's get straight to it. Yeah, and Capablanca just sort of blows his way right through to the point of what needs to be done in a very nice continuity fashion. H6 to guard the H-pawn, castles for white, and now C5. Rook on F to E1. Obviously, we may or may not be threatening to take on D4 because we don't want to open up the C file, but he does gain time on the bishop and prepares to improve his pieces. After all, piece coordination is the hallmark that we're looking at. This is a very unusual move. Are we at move number 14? Black plays rook on A8 to B8. This is quite crazy, right? Quite crazy. If queen takes A7, are we pushing forward with B5? This seems very unusual that this is the real move. I can't quite imagine that white cannot take that pawn on A7. I'm going to check the Chess Star Series here for a moment for further confirmation of this. The New York State Chess Championship was perhaps his first tournament. There's no cross table to it because it was a Swiss system. Then he played with the Manhattan Chess Club in a match versus the New Jersey Chess Club and the Franklin Chess Club against Walter Penn Shipley. Franklin Chess Club, by the way, is located in Philadelphia. Wow. He doesn't talk about it either. He does not talk about queen takes A7. In the Chess Star Series, game number 5, he glosses over it. Whose notes is he using? Is he just using these notes? I'm just curious. 22. Queen E5. 23. F takes E3. Is he really just ripping all the notes off of Chernev, or is he analyzing for himself in the Chess Star Series? 25 H4. Yeah, he gives notes there. Well, that's interesting. The Chess Star Series is using the previous annotators without giving them credit. That's not kosher. So it looks to me, this book, by the way, by Caparos, is not necessarily one of my favorites because all he does is spew out. All he does is spew out the variations in the games. One of my favorites, which of course I had to buy in hardcover, Golombek's Capablanca's Best Games. The match with Marshall. 8th match game, 6th match game. Uh-oh. He does not give the 5th match game. I think Golombek actually preferred the E4 openings. the 23rd and last match game of New York 1909. Alright, we're going to check Reinfeld now. 100 Immortal Games of Capablanca. I believe there are 100 anyway. Let's take a quick peek. 112. Oh, I could do a Capablanca 24-hour stream every day of the week, honestly. Every single day of the week. So 1909, fifth match game versus Marshall. 32. It starts on 32. Oh no. Is this the same problem as the other book? It's only going to give the sixth match game. Indeed, he only gives the sixth match game, which is a Ruy Lopez by Capablanca. The eighth match game, which is a Ruy Lopez. The 11th match game, which is a Queen's Gambit declined. Is that where we are? We're on the fifth match game. The 23rd and last game, of course, is Immortal. So here we are, everyone. Here we are. He does not mention the possibility of Queen takes A7. But obviously it has to be considered. So rook to b8 was a little bit of a bluff, to a certain extent. White plays bishop d3, and now black is better. Honestly. Can't believe no one comments on the possibility of playing bishop queen takes a7. Marshall wasn't a materialist. Right? Honestly, I really want to know if he can actually take that pawn. Or if the score sheet is incorrect and it's just been repeated over the years. That's the other thing. Short of me bringing up Capablanca. So where are we? I do have to start looking into some tournaments for myself other than rook to b8. Yeah, bishop to d3. Very sad, very sad. With no notes on this whatsoever. Bishop to d3, knight to f6. Wait just a moment. I take it back. Alright, that's why there's no notes on it. It's my notation problem. Remember how I said how some fonts, it's very difficult to tell the difference between E and C? Like rook to E1 and rook to C1? Well, apparently, Silly me, right? Queen to e4. We can cut this one out of the YouTube video should there ever be one. Queen to e4. Capablanca points out this is an attractive move. Not only gains white no advantage, but encourages him to put his pieces on good squares with a gain of time. The font is absolutely horrid. So basically, yes, knight f6. No, I don't have any YouTube advertisement just yet. I have the studies on YouTube though. Eventually, I will promote the YouTube. Yeah, this is really primitive on White's part in a match game to play caveman chess like this. Queen f4, bishop to b7, e4. He's still trying. He's still at it. Black's moves are timed, says Herman Helms. Herman Helms was I think he was the editor of the New York Times column, and he was also one of Bobby Fischer's earliest chess coaches. Herman Helms, the New York Times, with a precision that discloses the mind of a master player. And here we go, rook to e3. White's position looks imposing, but with a few sharp moves, Capablanca exposes all of the weaknesses. Ta-da! Well, you'd think that this is exactly what we wanted. Why don't we play e5 because of knight to d5? And there's no time for bishop to h7, check, king takes. Rook takes c3. Actually, bishop h7, check, king h8. We're attacking the queen and the rook. There's no escaping that. So in any event, after rook to c3, he tries. And candidates for black. You found it, sir. How did you find it? Did you just Google it up? So the tricky part about monetization, right? Is that I like the idea of having the subscriptions and the immediate income from Twitch, even if it's not a lot. But the passive income from YouTube, it just seems so far, far away. So I'd rather build up on Twitch and then do YouTube later. Have to edit those videos. It's very time-consuming work, and it's passive instruction. Not really getting the interactivity of the chat like we do here. I know you can get the interactivity of the chat on YouTube, but it's just not quite the same. Maybe the audience is bigger. Maybe I should give it a shot. Check my multi-stream. So in this particular position, black to move, black actually powers through by bothering the queen. With g5, just punches him right in the schnoz. Knight takes g5. Of course, if the queen moves away, rook takes e3 gives black an endgame advantage. In any event, after knight takes g5, rook takes e3, queen takes e3, knight to g4 is the discovery that creates decisive endgame that we're about to look at. First, the fork. First, the fork from our sponsor. Queen to b8 check, king h7, e5 check, bishop to e4. It looks like we're getting there. Rook takes d4, bishop takes b1, and now we have an endgame with bishop and knight versus rook. Or is it? Well, it is. Black to move. Candidates for black. Round robins with closely rated peers. Type A parents prefer round robin events. Knight takes e5. Well, we have to consider what's going on here for the most part, but yes, knight takes e5 threatening knight f3 check is correct. Just a simple move, knight takes e5. There's no other tactics or threats coming on in here. Rook f4. Now candidates for black. One more time. This is the one that I really meant to quiz on. I apologize. I thought I'd move forward by one. Arakito on the ball as well. Salakai, the creator of our amazing sun badges. And of course, a legend of the stream. How was your streams, Alakai? We are studying Capablanca games. These sub badges go well with all types of beverages, and I am, by the way, for those of you who don't know me, FIDE trainer, national master in the United States, John MacArthur. Basically, being from the United States means that my intelligence should be questioned. Horrible blitz games. Believe it or not, blitz games are always horrible. The good news about blitz games being horrible, everyone, is that they provide a lot of fodder for learning how good your instincts are in chess. I wish I could block out the sun just right. Saturday or Sunday, you could definitely do a candidates match on Sunday probably. I think that might be best. Oh, you know what I can do? I can don a hat. That may help. That's what we'll do. This may help to protect me from the sun, and the lighting could be better. Yes, that works out well. No, don't redeem it now. Redeem it when we can do it. Because then it just sits here and I never know when it's going to actually go away. But yeah, no, in general, actually Saturday is not so great now that I think about it. But we'll figure it out. I'm glad we might have to be later on Saturday. We'll have to make his time. I know you're in Singapore. Is that correct? Makes the time a little trickier and different. So for the most part, yeah, it's very sunny here. And it's still very difficult. I wonder if I can change my camera settings on the Logitech G Hub. What do we think? Let's go back to the other one. Brightness. Do I need to save this? Video rotation. Is anything happening? I don't think so. Not while I'm using it. One second. I'm just going to check my camera settings. So yeah, black to move in this position. Camera access. Let apps access your camera. Camera settings. Yeah, I can't do anything with the camera settings at the moment. Unless I turn off my camera for a moment. Maybe that's possible. Interesting. That's the mixer. I need to look at the sources. One moment. I am checking your answers. This is a very cool game. I'm not putting the answer in just yet. Should be right side bar. There it is. MCD cam. Configure video. Camera control. Oh, so some things are happening. So the camera control is possible. I'm going to leave it at 110%. Okay, so we'll apply that. Exposure. I wonder if I can change that one. Focus. Auto. Ah, let's take off the exposure. Ah, there we go. We fixed it. For now, we fixed it. And I fix it back later. I like my hair too much to wear a hat all the time. So the camera control. Focus is auto-focused. Pan. Oh, that's cute. I don't mind that one. I'm going to apply that one. I like to have it further over. What about the tilt? Yep, I like it down more. That's good. Low light compensation. I never really have to worry about low light compensation at all in this room. So meanwhile, back at the ranch. Shalakai is one of the legends of the stream for those of you who are still here. In fact, he's one of the original legends. He, with his chessable instruction, absolutely, hands down, seeking, we're looking for black to move here. Not one person. I wanted to get an answer before I moved on. And of course, my strongest student among many, Grandmaster Mark Arnold, so many times national champion, played the U.S. Championship twice, but I have worked with a lot of the players over time. Bishop f5. Now, knowing what you know now, interestingly enough, knowing what you know now about the back rank, you should be able to see that we can threaten mate. So here's the cool part. Basically, rook takes e4 is off the cards because of knight f3 check, knight d2 check. And you can easily work out that knight that rook takes e4, king h1 is off the cards after knight f3 check because of queen h1. A brilliant move, being able to defy the logic of the natural placement of the pieces. Really, really key. Really, really key and really, really cool. That was a great move. Bishop b1, e4. And of course, now the knight gets to jump in, and the king should probably run for it. I think black's next move is not necessarily as easy to find. It's a tough call, honestly. Candidates for black. Zalakai, legend. And by the way, our sub badges are entirely dependent upon the generosity. Oh, keep hitting the wrong one. Candidate moves for black in this position. Generosity and amazing dedication that Zalakai has to chess. He truly loves doing chess, and he truly loves streaming. He's a good guy. If you've not yet followed, please follow. Please hit that follow button. That way I can hand out some gift subs. We're getting warmer. If every one of you were to hit that follow button, it supports the channel greatly. I would love to get 32 follows today. I know how to do it. It's just it's time consuming to be able to do it properly. Now, one thing that you have to examine ever so briefly, you have your candidate moves with the double checks, knight e1 and knight takes h4 double check, but what do they really do? Obviously, he's taking a free pawn. Can't be discounted after knight takes h4. But the problem is that when the king moves out of the double check, our pieces are going to be very miscombobulated. Or are they? For example, knight takes h4 double check. I'm just going to make sure that my move order is correct because this just looks too good to be true, right? Knight takes h4 double check if he goes king to f1. Then bishop to d3 check. The king has to go back to g1. Otherwise, if king e1, the knight e2, knight g2 check picks off the rook. And after king back to g1, knight to g6. Are we really that much better coordinated at the cost of a pawn? I don't know. Needless to say, you have knight e1 check, king f1, and it's much harder to justify why our bishop and our knight are both being attacked at the same time. Next up, bishop d5, and time's up, of course, but Capablanca actually chose f5. I really want to check this position with the notes. Knight takes h4 check just looks very, very awkward for white. I do not know why he didn't do it. Certainly knight take. Obviously he's very young, but still. This is the move that we missed. That's very cruel. And white has no choice but to take on f5. He can't allow knight to e5 with a gain of time after rook f3, And otherwise the rook's going on vacation completely to the queen side. And this queen is coming into b2. So rook to b4, knight e5 is still a serious threat. Yeah, knight takes h4 check. I had a hard time reasoning that one out. But Capablanca just plays solidly, and this is one of those things. Oh, he doesn't trade queens. He captures another pawn, which to me is very, very dangerous. And now we get knight takes h4, king h2, knight back to f3 check. By the way, I don't think there's any advantage to king h3 in that position. Because it might just transpose. Oh, he takes it? Is there an advantage to this? Queen takes e6 with an outside pass pawn, being down a rook, or being down a bishop. And the intermezzo. Queen to b2 check. Ouch. That does create a little bit of a problem. Queen to b7 check. If queen to b8, is there a reason that this is any different? I mean, he sort of helps white out in a way. So white checks at b6 and not c6 for two reasons. He wants the queen on a block square, and he wants to protect his rook when it is a pawn when it moves up. The important factor now is the queen at b6 and now at c6 will be seen later and is proof that Marshall did not miss a forced win. Aha! So we're getting into the controversy now. After king h5, king h2, bishop to a2. It is at this point that the critics placing the white queen erroneously at c6 stated that Marshall missed a mate or the win of a queen by means of queen to e8 check, king to g5, f4 check, king to g4, and queen to e2 mate. All forced, of course. So therefore, with the queen on b6, the position appeared in Chess Review in June 1933, in Brand's column Mistakes of the Masters and Dumont's Basis of Chess Combination, In Gutmeyer's chess practical chess practice, and in chess for March of 1951 in Gerald Abrams' The Chess Mind, in Alexander's Penguin Book of Chess Positions, and I have no doubt the position appeared. Thus we find Marshall ruining one of the few opportunities given him by Capablanca. It struck me as strange that Capablanca should fall into a mate, just as strange as that Marshall should miss it. For Frank Marshall had a keen eye for mate and five, as anyone had ever lived. And I've seen him solve in a twinkling problems that baffled other masters. It would seem that critics copy from one another without looking up the original score of the game before finding fault with the players concerned. For the sake of record, Frank Marshall never missed a golden opportunity to checkmate Capablanca, as the latter never gave him a chance to do so. Now back to our game. Queen to b6, b5, king to g6, a5, queen to d4, queen to c6 check, queen e8 check, getting the queen behind the passed pawn, a6, queen e2 check, and bishop d5. The a8 square is covered, and it's game over. There's still no checks. Mate and 2 is threatened, and in the handling of this game, Capablanca has provided a rare tweet. Marshall Capablanca. Yeah, this is the gem in the collection, easily. It's so funny that people will have the 23rd game after the 6th and the 8th. Ooh. Pegasus, I just refunded your hydrate points because I realized that I never drank water before. And I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't drink water in the earlier stream. Ron, how are you? I was just noticing the chess pieces up there. It could take. So where are we? Now this game, of course, is one of those true gems of Capablanca versus Marshall. The terrace defense was the order of the day in 1909. Rubinstein. Mises played Rubinstein and played this opening. I'm going to have to look that one up. Mises versus Rubinstein. C takes d5, e takes d5, knight f3. Knight to b6, and now Rubinstein's defense coming on, and now there are quite a number of moves here for black. Knight f6 being the most logical, but Capablanca plays the rather awkward move bishop e6, and this should result in a certain amount of passive play. So already you can see that he's got bishop e6 in instead of castles for black. And I was going to mention that the stronger line is d takes c5 as recommended over here. And after bishop takes c5, knight a4. White has nothing, I'm sorry, black has nothing better than bishop to e7, and now white starts locking down on these squares. Let's see, move number 11. Bishop c1, e3, black castles, and then knight d4, blockading and attacking this pawn as well as the bishop pair. In any event, how are we doing on coffee? I may need to replenish the coffee. Let's see what happens here. Meanwhile, back at the ranch. All of this looks pretty good, but this is where Lasker's freeing maneuver comes in. And now Frank Marshall outdoes himself a little bit with this move, knight to e5. Honestly, you just need to keep developing. Personally, I would just play rook on a to c1, or at worst, d takes c5 to put the emphasis on the weakness on d5. But Frank Marshall reacts badly. Oh no, d takes c5, knight takes c3. B takes c3, queen takes c5, and white's queen side is broken up. So he does comment on that. So yeah, Rubinstein Mises continued with rook on a1 to c1. Ooh. I apologize. So meanwhile, after queen e7, Frank Marshall goes a little nuts here with knight e5, honestly. Knight takes d4 without fear. Knight takes e4, d takes e4, e3, and now the moment of truth. Black hits him with knight f3 check, knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes, and you can already see that the pawn on b7 is under quite a bit of pressure. Black simply castles. We already know that even though white plays rook on f1 to c1, if he tries to take the pawn, there's a bit of a skewer at the end. And losing the pawn on b2 with pressure on a2 is not acceptable. Not acceptable. So rook on f to c1 was played. Rook on a to b8. Queen e4. Queen c7. Rook c3. And this turns into one of the truly great games of all time. b5. a3 to prevent b, but we're just going to bolster our blockade of those dark squares and use our white squares for the pawns. Rook on f8 to d8. The only open file is under black's control for a moment. Let's see. And now g6 to prevent any funny business. He's trying to seek exchanges. but he will with the queen in a less awkward position. And now for something completely different. Rook to d1 check, king g2, a5. Rook takes c2. Sorry, not a5. a5, rook takes c2, b4. So now the moment of truth. How are we going to get these pawns moving? Our candidate pass pawn is obviously the c pawn, but there's a few good tricks that Marshall uses here. I'm sorry, that Capablanca uses here against Marshall. First things first, we tie down the rook. Next, we actually bother the rook in a way that's going to lead him to losing more material. Oh, I take that back. He didn't play that right away. He played rook to c1, threatening rook to c2. And with the bishop on d1, now he overworks everything. B takes c3, b2. Rook takes b2, rook takes d1. And he immediately puts his bishop behind the pawn again. However, that doesn't mean the bishop can stay there. So now he's relegated to the sidelines. Check. And we can't play f3 because of rook to c2 check. So he tries to run for it. f4, h5. Still have an idea of playing the possibility of bishop to f5 check. So g4 to escape further damage. H takes g4, king takes g4, rook takes h2. I remember this in my early lessons very distinctly. f5 check. You might think this is crazy. They played g3, rook e2, rook c4. At least he's only losing the pawn on g3. King h4, king to g7, and we're threatening to play king to h6, followed by bishop to c2. So check, king f6. All right, I need to stretch. Definitely need to stretch before I do the last game. So we're threatening bishop to g2 with the idea of mate. Move number 47, king f6, rook to d7. There are no more checks on c6. Bishop g2 is advertised. Rook d6 check. It's still going to be mate, though, by the way, because now it doesn't really matter. Rook h3 check, king g5. It's rook h5. It doesn't really matter where he goes at all. Can I get 2 more games in before time is up? The only tricky part about these games is that they are very, very long. The Unknown Capablanca. The Primer of Chess by Capablanca. My Chess Career by Capablanca. It's crazy. I'm going to watch some Lee Chess TV for a moment. Vincent Kamer. as I stretch my legs. Pegasus, I know I'm behind. I am hoping to catch up on Pegasus' streams on Thursday. That's my optimal goal. Thursday morning, Pegasus. We're going to be doing your stream with, let's see, where am I? Johnny Hector or Labordonnais. Not sure which one I'm going to do. I don't know if I have this. I need a lot of sleep for the Magnus Carlsen 6-hour stream study. But we're going to do it. We're going to do it. I love this idea because the subs or the rewards will make me study chess more as well as you. Hector it is. He's much more excited. How many stretches? No, I'm not going to have you. I'm not going to have you waste 1,000 reward zone points on that one. I'm rejecting that one. I need to use the facilities as well as get coffee. And replenish the water. So hopefully 5 minutes. I'm hoping no more than 5 minutes. Crossing my fingers. 10:14 right now. Alright. Oh, my daughter. She's so funny. God. My other daughter is at work. My wife is heading to work. My daughter goes, or my youngest daughter goes, now all I need is for you to leave and the house will be perfect. I'm like, you can't share? I can't have upstairs, you can't have downstairs? It's like, no. But it's going to be good. All right. This one I don't remember the last time I saw this end game. I really don't. I really don't. So therefore, Flicks, how are you? Hold the phone. I think I have to do another short stream for MD night just because I feel I could have been more energetic in this one. Also because MD night has gifted subs far more than anyone on the whole. You should definitely put it in the Discord at the moment. Because I'm gonna, oops, if I can spell. Definitely put it in the Discord since I'm gonna finish this study stream on Capablanca and I have one game to go. Looks like I'm not gonna get much done other than this one game. This is Capablanca. Crameborg. Oh, I've already done Capablanca Crameborg. Let me just make sure before I this is 1910. It does not show here. Alright, we're going to do it again. Maybe I have looked at it again then recently. So this is the New York State Championship of 1910. I am very low. Really? You're not the first person to tell me this. I don't necessarily know what I can say. Why is that? Which one am I really using? Okay, I'm going to try this one. What about that? Is that better? No. Yes, yes. Hold on. Capablanca was one of the greatest world champions of all time. How about if I turn off the Yeti? I'm going to test this microphone now. Why do I have two microphones? I'm going to try this one, Better now? I'm hoping that it's better now. And now I'm going to turn. All right, testing, testing. I'm going back to the other microphone, which I don't like as much. I'm gonna have to figure something out on the microphone department in a separate testing area. And we'll know what we're talking about then. I know I'm back. Let's check the filters on the other microphone. There are no filters here. Very annoying. Now, do I have more than one filter open? No, huh? So noise suppression. Noise gate. Control shift. Darn it, I don't want to have to fix these things this way. But I will. And then the limiter. And then the compressor. I'm hoping to do these things, and maybe it's in the filters that is jettisoning me, perhaps. And then the noise suppression. Close. All right, let's try this again. Properties. Testing. Speakers, sound touch. HD Pro webcam, yada yada yada. Those are global settings. I don't really want that. Is that true? Wait 1 second. Track number 2 for that one. Might be the track. All right, we've learned something at least. Sorry for the interruption in the stream. Webcam, yada yada yada. Microphone, filters, edit filters. Oh wait, can I copy filters? That'll be even better. Filters, copy filters, filters, paste filters. That will be pretty cool. Edit filters. That was easy. How are the filters now? Much better, I hope. Crossing my fingers. All right. So meanwhile, yeah, even in 1910, C5 was thought to be a better move against the London than just E6. In fact, the comment is that everyone wondered how Capablanca could play such a quiet opening with no chances of winning. And it's a miracle that something does happen that allows him to win the game. They are, of course, referring to the London opening. E6, C5, C3, Knight C6, Bishop D3. Bishop D6, Bishop takes D6, Queen takes D6, Knight on 1 to D2. And now Black plays E5. And literally, Black just needs to amend his terrible bishop. And what does he have? Oh, he doesn't play it that way. He actually plays bishop to B5 check. After bishop D7, then queen A4. Black needs to be able to castle, so he has to play queen C7. Got it. So castles for white, castles for black. Bishop takes D7, knight takes D7, and knight F3. Wow, what should black do here? Is this really that advantageous for white? This pawn is very weak. It's a backward pawn on an open file. It's actually quite crazy. After knight F6, that pawn is just so weak. But knight F6 is easily the best move. Capablanca's opponent, unfortunately, plays an awkward move. And white finds a really cool follow-up. Let me just see this. So queen to C6. Knight F6 is better for black by almost a pawn. That's crazy. We have to give that one the full blunder. We have to give that one the full blunder. Was there an actual even threat? Well, Is this a threat? Because of knight to b6, right? You're absolutely right. Rook on a to e8. Or rook on f to e8 even. Yeah, it's really sad. Anything is better. But black is just better after knight f6. And like there's no threat. But he wants to grab the outpost square. I can understand that. He wants to just improve his knight and not have to worry about it. Maybe the actual threat was to play c4. Then even then, knight to b6. You're right. Even on c4, we also have the option of playing rook to e4. So it's like, not only do we have that, but this is terrible. Queen to c6. It is, after all, the New York State Championship. With the New York State Championship, c'est la vie. He finds the move knight f3, d2, knight e5, king c2, c4. Like, this doesn't even look that good anymore. Look on h to f1, f5, knight f3, knight takes f3, d takes f3. And of course, he also could have accepted the challenge and put his knight on d3.
45.
Okay.
We have to go now.
There's no we. I can't go. I'm in the middle of a stream. I have to finish and I have a lesson at 11. Take your car.
It's all ice.
I can't drive it. You got this, boo. It's your turn. I took her yesterday. The biggest debate in the house. How do we get to the train station from here? We really do have to even out all these world champions, so we have at least 15 games per world champion, right? And the really important thing is to create chessable books out of them. Absolutely, absolutely important to create chessable books out of all of these world championship studies. Very important. Master Chess Dojo. Not only that, but they will be free. The rook on A to E8. Candidates for white. Candidates for white in this position. Did I refund his stretch? I did, didn't I? I refunded his poll for a stretch. How many minutes? Sure, I was looking for that book. You need a deck of cards. Hi. Deck of Binion's casino cards here. Candidate moves for white. If rook takes d5, so hold on, 45 seconds. I want to check these Binion's casino cards that I got at Binion's Casino in downtown Las Vegas. Can I use them for tonight's wild card drawing? I literally use a deck of cards for the wild card drawing. How cool is that? Minions, wild card drawing. I love it. Ace, king, queen, jack, ace. Got it. Make sure I take these with me. All right. Rook d4, b3, rook g1, and h4 all look like good candidates. You're absolutely right. But now the order in which to approach things, he chooses the rook lift and the rook shift with rook to d4. Now, this does two things. A, it might even be preparing the move e4, but really, he could be transferring his rook across. He could be tenderizing the c4 pawn for b3, as you pointed out, one of your candidate moves. So black actually tries to do anything, and then he does tenderize. c4 takes b3, a takes b3, king f7, double rook and pawn ending, king d3, rook e7, rook a1, king e6, and of course we follow through on our idea with rook a6. All of black's rooks are tied down, and now we get to see the rook shift. g5. Candidates for white in this position. Candidates for white. Candidates for white in this position. What do we got? May need to ask for 11:15 for my lesson. Trick E. Candidate take a thing. I should just put up candidate moves in a poll. That's what I should do. I should put up candidate moves in a poll every single time and run a poll. But then I have to keep my eye on it because it tends to go away after a while. And obviously, part of the problem for many players is coming up with the candidate moves. Literally coming up with candidate moves because you don't want to let go of what are the best moves. Candidate take a thing, Pog. I see what you mean. Rook takes a7, yes. That is a default. And h4, of course, is the other move. He doesn't really want to release the tension in the position or improve, let's just say, black's ridiculous rook on c7 by exchanging it off, because why should he give up his active rooks for the rook on c7 when he can keep the pressure on? But now black goes after the f2 pawn. He cannot allow white to have domination on both flanks of the board by playing g5 takes h4, rook takes h4. And black might even be in Zugzwang in a little bit because his king will not have any shelter he claims. b4 will lock down on the center, threatening b5. Yeah, if this were to happen, b4 threatens b5. Black is practically in Zugzwang. on both sides of the coin. So rather than playing that move, he plays g4. And after king e2, g takes f3. King takes f3. So could he have played it differently? Let me just take a quick peek. So they don't really question Capablanca's moves. Capablanca just plays king e2, and they don't look at this one that much. Because it still looks like it might be the same awkward and passive position after rook takes. Because we're threatening, followed by h7, and we're threatening on this side of the board as well. So it's tough. King e2 is the best move. F takes g4, there's nothing wrong with it. Got it. F takes g4. F takes g4. And of course, rook takes g4. Nope, king e2 anyway. That's the follow-up. So Capablanca goes with king e2 straight away. And the idea of rook takes h4 does not threaten the pawn, as after f takes g4, the rook can't take because of check. So we end up in this position. Rook on f6 to f7. King e2, and now we circle back around. I remember this game now. Relatively clearly, I remember this game. As the king relocates toward the queen side, or toward the king side, and back toward the queen side. King to d6. b4 is advertised. Trying to stop b5. h5. h6. f4. Rook to g7. King to d3. Just as I said before, I'm not entirely sure that this is threatening anything. He's stopping king to d4. Or is he? So rook to a1, then the king comes in. Threatening mate in 1. Eviction. Oh, no, black actually tries to get all of his rooks active. I apologize. Definitely deserve to look at both of those, though. And now king to d3, zugzwang. Rook takes, rook takes. Rook e7, and we're right back where we were, except a little different. And all the weaknesses are falling. Do not hurry. And now everything falls. Thank you very much. Black does have a passed outside pawn. Check. And all the pawn weaknesses fall. I also looked at this one, but the king can just guard the rook, but this one just falls. And then there'll be a passed pawn. That's the end of the world as we know it. We will revisit these. What about rook f4 also? Hold on, I'm going back to it. Yes, possibly rook f4. Absolutely, and possibly rook f4. All right. I need to send everybody out. Lesson 11. Thank you all for being here. Namaste. I am going to do another Capablanca short stream for MD Night Zero. I am. Just because there are a couple games like Capablanca Tartakower that were not covered in this stream. I just want to mention that this will be in the Discord as well. Make sure I post this in the World Championship study. Is it too late to add? At MD90. There we go. Craziness. We may reorder those games ever so slightly. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Cheers, and thank you. I'll be back later. Probably Thursday morning will be our next series of long streams. Ciao.